Okay, well, thanks for joining us, everyone. This is now our second official webinar as the Global Biofoundry Alliance Working Group on Business Model Sustainability. And I've already forgotten the full title. I don't have it in front of me. It's very wordy.
We need to chop it down.
Yeah, we need some other acronym, GBA, other acronym. But anyway, it's all about essentially making your biofoundry or getting your biofoundry to a sustainable income level and sharing protocols and best methods to get us there. I'm co-chairing that working group with Allison, who's joining us today from Brisbane. I'm in Toronto, and Janet as well, I believe, is in Brisbane, speaking to us today about how to set up a biofoundry from scratch, which some of us have been through. I'm going through that right now, and so I'm going to be taking really close notes on that. This session is also being recorded, and it will be uploaded to our YouTube following the meeting. We'll host, if you can save your questions to the end, we'll have a Q&A. I believe there's a chat which you can put in your questions or raise your hand, and we'll unmute you to ask your question in person. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Allison for Janet's bio.
Thanks, Ben, and good morning, everybody from Brisbane on the east coast of Australia. I'm delighted to introduce my colleague, Dr. Janet Reid, who will talk to us about setting up a biofoundry. Janet's the CSIRO, the Commonwealth Scientific Industry Research Organisation, commonly known as CSIRO, which is the organisation both Janet and I work for. CSIRO is Australia's national science agency, and Janet is the Biofoundry facility manager. She's an experienced molecular biologist and molecular and cell biologist, and has a Bachelor of Science in Microbiology from the University of New South Wales, a graduate diploma in biotech, and a PhD in investigating proteases associated with prostate cancer from the Queensland University of Technology. For 3 years, she worked for the Community for Open Antimicrobial Drug Discovery, a not-for-profit initiative at the Institute of Molecular Biosciences at the University of Queensland. And in this group, she developed high-throughput human cell screening protocols assessing effects of antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory compounds. Now, as the Biofoundry manager, Janet manages a team of molecular biologists and a data engineer, assisting researchers and industry with adapting standard batch molecular biology approaches to high-throughput automated alternatives to generate and test DNA materials and engineered microbial strains. And the purpose of this work is to generate and test DNA materials and engineered microbial strains that may be useful for research and industry. So handing over to you, Janet. Thank you.
Thanks, Allison and Ben. Thanks very much for the invitation to speak today. I'm going to share my screen. Thumbs up if it's going well with the sharing, Allison. Well, hey, yes. Thank you very much. Beautiful. So thanks very much for joining us today from wherever you are across the world. I'm presenting today from from Brisbane, which are the lands of the Turrbal, Yagara and Jagera Indigenous peoples of Australia. So our Biofoundry, we're based in Dutton Park. We're a high throughput DNA and engineering organism facility. And we have the traditional design, build, test, learn workflow. But the reason that we exist comes about because of some work that different agencies around Australia did in working out what Australia needs over the coming decades in terms of being able to remain competitive and at the forefront of bioengineering or biotechnology. So one of those parts of work was the ECOLA report, which found that synthetic biology was going to be transformational, and we were going to require a skilled workforce, and we were going to need integrated national infrastructure. And there was an infrastructure report And there was also the setup of the CSIRO Synthetic Biology Future Science platform that came through from this work. And most recently, we've got the ARC Centre of Excellence for Synthetic Biology have all come out of these national initiatives working out what we need. As Alison mentioned, we're from the CSIRO, so the National Science Agency. We're spread out across Australia. We've got sites on all the points of Australia. We have a very diverse population of team across all these different sites, and one of those groups is working with engineering biology or with we call synthetic biology. And as I mentioned, we did have the CSIRO Synthetic Biology Future Science platform, which is where the inception for the Biofoundry came from. So there was a drive to actually bring about a change in the way Australia approached synthetic biology, and CSIRO was one of those pivotal organisations leading the way in this. And the KPIs were all around how we're going to achieve those in the long term. And from that, I'd want to highlight that the infrastructure and the human resources and the collaborative community are part of the things that the Biofoundry are now representing. So CSIRO found a pot of money for instruments, and so we began building our Biofoundry. Some of the members of the GBA will know Claudia Vickers and Maciej Holoko, who first started the Biofoundry, and then they brought me in, and then my colleague Hugh came on board not long after that. We had a bit of money to spend on some equipment and not much else. And from there, we did a lot of work. So part of it was a lot of interviews that Maciej and Claudia did with existing Biofoundries. And there's an in-house report that we have. Unfortunately, we're not able to share it, but we talked to a number of Biofoundries across the world about how they went about building theirs, what sort of funding models, and one of the things that was interesting to us was that some foundries were distributed and some were centralized. A good example of a distributed model is Agile. And also all the other challenges that come along with building a facility, the types of engagement that you have with academia and industry, and the types of service models that people build. And from all that information, and also the types of equipment that they use to deliver the types of activities they had. So from that, we decided what were the first pieces of equipment that we would need, and also the subsequent things that we would purchase over the coming months. So, you know, I could talk about kit all day, but you know, liquid handling systems, colony picking robots, and DNA analyzers were top of the list for things to bring in the first place. After we first started at the University of Queensland in a little room that pretty much looked like a cupboard. There would be a couple of people on the call that would have visited us when we were in that state. And then because it became very clear that we were going to need a lot more space and that we wouldn't be able to find it in the short term where we were, we relocated across the river to the Dutton Park site at the Eco Sciences Precinct, and we are now housed by CSIRO there. And it looks like a really short distance across, but that bridge there is only for buses and pedestrians. So to actually get our gear across, we have to travel across the city. But that said, where we are now is a wonderful site. We've got room for what we're doing at the moment, but as many of you know, when you start thinking about future plans, you always start thinking about what you're going to need next, how you plan to negotiate for more space if you need that, what sort of infrastructure, what sort of support that you need around, and it feels like it's a constant evolution. Moving across to CSIRO also brought us in some CSIRO talent, which was fantastic. Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I'm giggling. Colin Scott first joined us as sort of like a scientific expert, and he also knows CSIRO in and out and has been in CSIRO for a long time and knows how the system works, and was really instrumental in getting us a solid footing in the organization. And I think that that's probably one of those things where you need to have advocates, people that can back the concepts that you are pushing. So Colin has been that. Likewise, Alison also an excellent advocate and support for the Biofoundry, and I've worked with Alison for a number of years now, finessing the way the Biofoundry works and how we interact in CSIRO, and it's been fabulous. And I was say that one of the things that we've really benefited from has been having access to a communications specialist, and in the early days that was Larissa Sherman, and she was really instrumental in getting a few of the key planks in our outward and inward facing marketing in place. So that, I think that has been fantastic. So with moving into, so I'll say, okay, when I say with moving into CSIRO, we started looking at business models, sustainability and value proposition. That's not actually true. We actually have been looking at it consistently from the beginning. And when I look back, we've probably been reviewing our approach, I think it would be annually, that where we regularly review where we sit in the ecosystem. We review what sort of opportunities there are, you know, if there are changes in direction, what sort of technology is coming along that may disrupt our models. So I would say that we began at the very beginning looking at what sort of business model we would need, and that has evolved over time, and it's evolved depending on where we're sitting with the organizations that are hosting us. And I'd posit to you what sort of challenges have been at the forefront for you in building your Biofoundry, or when you are looking at building your Biofoundries. And it would be something that would be great for us to discuss at the end of the presentation. So one of our constraints working in the CSIRO environment is that because we're a national science agency, we have a mandate not to compete with local industry. So we have a full cost recovery model. And that can be a challenge working in an environment which spans academia through to industry. So where some facilities may be able to present a tiered model with a discounted approach to academia or subsidized approach to those at one tier, going through to full cost recovery at the industry level. We have a flatter structure to our pricing, and that is one of those things that has changed over time. So early on we were able to offer a more tiered structure, and as we have moved into CSIRO, we are now on this flatter structure. That said, what we're doing is actually trying to be a bit more creative about how we approach things. So we're tapping into some of the resources in CSIRO, and they do have programs that can help, but they are geared towards, again, industry, startups, small businesses. They are, because CSIRO is the national agency, that's where their focus is. So they do have programs where we can offer access to some of these I guess you call them value add, or if they pay part of the cost, and CSIRO will kick in part of the cost to access the service, but they have to meet certain thresholds to qualify for those. And that's great because in Australia at the moment, there is a really strong startup industry. There are a number of players, especially in the sort of ag food space, and a number of them are looking at how they leverage those programs to work with us. But also one of the things that Alison has been working on has been engagement with our local state government. We're based in the state of Queensland, and Queensland has had the name the smart state for a very long time because they really have focused heavily over a good 25 years or so on building infrastructure and partnerships across Queensland to support research at all levels. And so that type of approach by the state government has been really beneficial in the way Alison's been able to engage with them, and they're looking at how we could perhaps tap into some sort of a voucher system with them so that state-based industries could access the facility, access the Biofoundry as well. And when we talk about academic projects, I think the key thing for us has been that we are emphasizing planned engagement. So emphasizing that if they would like to access our services, think about how they would approach it when their grant cycles, just like they would with any other large scale facility. If they're accessing, for instance, an animal house or microscopy facility, there would certainly be a budget line where they're looking at, how much they would need to apportion to that. And because we're one of those newer types of facilities, and it's an exciting place to be, it hasn't always been planned into their grant cycle yet. So that's something that we're really emphasizing at the moment. So as I said, we do engage with a number of people. As I mentioned, academic is a little bit challenging. We do have a lot of project work coming through in CSIRO. First of all, it was coming through from the Synthetic Biology Future Science platform, but there's a newly formed Advanced Engineering Biology Future Science platform, which sort of dovetails on picking up where the SynBio FSP left off. And now there'll be a number of projects coming through on that, and a lot of projects that are looking in the space of AI and ML and how that technology can be leveraged to accelerate discovery. CSIRO also has a future protein mission, and we're working through with that, as well as we're part of what's called the Trailblazer Initiative, and that's looking at future foods, and that's where I say we're now moving into sort of industry research, where it's a partnership between CSIRO and industry to look at food innovation. But we also have projects looking at sustainable products. For instance, breakdown of waste oils and fats for production of bioplastics, projects like that. So in terms of fostering the engagement, communication strategy, I think, has been one of the key planks. So as I mentioned, Larissa, who came on board and worked with us for a number of months, she really helped us build a number of outward and inward facing strategies. So web presence has been one of the key things that we have, and the web presence has actually been a really interesting thing, because when people look at it, they come to it and they go, oh, CSIRO, and they do bioengineering, and we get loads of people coming to us with some really interesting types of projects that don't necessarily fit with us, but they are definitely in the biotechnology space. And so we've become sort of like this shop front for CSIRO biotechnology in general. And we've been fielding a lot of queries and passing them on to other people in CSIRO, which has been really fantastic because it also builds a connection with other arms of CSIRO. And also sometimes the projects that come through those queries, they may be very early stage and they may be able to tap into CSIRO research that's researchers that have the background to be able to do the background work on that before it goes into high throughput engineering. So they'll feed that project back through to us. So I think the web presence has been an excellent driver of business for CSIRO in general, but for us as well. You know, all the obvious things like conferences, case studies that we're building to put onto our web pages as well, webinars like this one, and also industry webinars. You know, if there are any industry partners or vendors that are looking to, you know, partner with you to present your material and how their platform can be used, depending on you know, the restrictions about how you can manage those relationships. That's also a useful way. One of the things that we've added to our wheelhouse has been a persistent unique identifier. So, and we're using this as a mechanism to have acknowledgement on publications for the Biofoundry work, because we won't necessarily appear as authors on a publication because we're a service facility, but we would like to have a way of people tracking where we are, who we are, where to find us, and so a persistent identifier has been a beneficial addition. Publications are also part of our thing, and building a Biofoundry publication that was driven largely by Maciek, my colleague, and we had a team that spanned legal and social sciences and the molecular sciences to develop this paper, looking at how you build a Biofoundry, looking at it from all aspects. So tapping into everything from the business model through to engagement with industry and clients and the types of infrastructure that you might need to think about. So I'd encourage you to have a look at that publication. And I'd say the Global Biofoundries Alliance has been a really fundamental part of our engagement across the world. We get a great deal of exposure and we get a lot of really beneficial discussions from being part of this alliance. So that's been fantastic, and also being able to find out what sort of resources people are developing in their foundries, and how we might be able to use those when we're doing our service delivery, whether through licensing or if there's other mechanisms for accessing their technology. So I'm just going to take a little turn now and go back to how we're building the actual infrastructure. So money for equipment hasn't really been such an issue for us. It seems in Australia, money for buildings and equipment seems to flow reasonably well, but when it comes to actually staff levels, that does lag behind, because staff levels do have a level of commitment to them, because you're taking on a person, you're taking them on for X number of years, you know, on contracting with contracts, and it just seems to be a little bit of a hurdle in the more short-term approaches that funding agencies have to their approach. So it seems that sometimes money for equipment comes from, there'll be a period of underspend, for instance, and they'll go, oh, that's really interesting. We've got some money. What can we do with that? And then suddenly you can get yourself a new instrument. So it seems to be a little bit like that in some instances, and I would be really interested to see whether that's a universal experience or whether this is a challenge that is unique to our region of the world. So questions about what sort of challenges have there been for you for staffing or equipment? In terms of staffing, we do have a really great pipeline of people coming through with the right skills and interests in being part of our ecosystem. And that's been driven a lot by the Synthetic Biology Future Science platform, because they were pivotal in sort of like building up these programs, networking with the universities to kind of, you know, drawing these collaborations together, funding PhDs or top-up scholarships. So there has been a lot of work over the past, I'll say 6-8 years to develop that sort of capability in Australia. And from that, one of the challenges is actually losing our staff, or losing staff, or being in competition with the startups that are coming up in Australia, because there are a number. They're also hungry for talented people. Luckily, we have a talented team at the moment, so I'm hoping I don't lose any of them anytime soon. But there is a natural flow at the moment from the university sector through CSIRO and through the startups and the industries at the moment. Yep, so when we come to the end, it would be great to hear about some of the challenges that you have had in your environment. Just going to do a quick time check, excuse me. Okay. Okay, so onto staff. So it took us a while, but we now finally have a critical mass of staff members. So we've got 2 bioengineers in the lab, Lisa and Candice, both ex-PhD students. They're now working as engineering staff in our facility. They run projects in conjunction with our collaborators or our clients. Have Lee Gebby, who has joined us recently. She's a very experienced molecular biologist, has been in the synthetic biology world for a number of years, and has got a depth of experience across a range of techniques and microorganisms, and has been a fantastic addition to our team, and has a great role in also guiding Lisa and Candice, giving them suggestions on and ideas about how to approach things or novel approaches that they may have not come across yet in their careers. So Lee has been a fantastic addition. I can't stress enough how valuable a data engineer has been to our team, and I'll go into that a little bit later, but Adrian has been fantastic, helping us wrangle things at the back end. And I think that for us, the way the CSIRO model works, assignment to projects is paramount in CSIRO, but we also found that there is a gap between the necessary know-how and experience in being able to bridge the gap between what project officers can do and what the enterprise support services that CSIRO can provide in terms of management of data. And Adrian fills that gap, bridging the gap for the team and for how we interweave or intermesh with CSIRO. And we've recently been joined by Juan Martinez, a postdoc researcher. He's come through on the ABFSP. He's working on a 3-year project embedded with the Biofoundry, and really enjoying access to the automation that affords. And he has some brilliant ideas about how he's going to approach his work over the coming years. And he's building strong collaborations across CSIRO and outside of CSIRO, which will be of great benefit to the Biofoundry as well, as he brings in new techniques and develops new techniques as well. So just touching on the types of software or things that people might need to think about when they're building their foundries. For us, there is sort of like an intermeshing network of softwares that we need to work with. At the top, we'd say, is the DNA screening service. I know that a number of institutes or a number of biofoundries have in-house produced software. So I'll just say, with one of the things that we looked at when we were building the foundry was whether we wanted to adopt bespoke in-house solutions or solutions from other foundries, or whether we wanted to go down a commercial pathway for some of these solutions. And we largely decided that because we were not going to be able to get the critical mass of staff or the right staff to be able to continually support more niche products, we decided that it would be better to work with vendors to bring in technology for us. And that's not necessarily the way that every foundry is going to approach it, because we're in CSIRO, we don't necessarily have the same access to the flow through of talented postdocs and PhD students, people that can build platforms or manage platforms in that way, or have an interest in doing that as part of a project. Or but with CSIRO, it's more sort of like a professional agency where we have research scientists, and we do have postdocs, we do have research arm, but it's not necessarily the same model as a university environment. So we had to think carefully about how we were going to approach it, because there are some really fantastic tools, but then we did have concerns about how we were going to be able to manage that longer term. That said, going this commercial route does have expense, so you do have to think about how you build that into your cost model, how you think about how that's going to be defrayed across different projects, and the types of the rate use you might need to apply across over the term of the contracts of the software. At the moment, with the ThreatSec system, we're just doing it sort of as a per base pair screening service. So we're not locked into a long-term contract on that one, but we do have contracts with Teselagen, and Lab Archives has been brought in by CSIRO to manage across the entire organization. But that said, looking at how we have the flow of data between these different systems, and also from our instrumentation, between instrumentations, how we have the transitions of data state as it moves through, it's necessary to have somebody like Adrian on board to be able to manage that, because it's a big task for the project team to be able to run projects and then also wrangle this end of things. And as I said, there's a gap between where CSIRO information technology support will end and where they expect us to pick up and take that on. As institutes evolve, and as CSIRO changes and looks to how things will work in the future, I'm strongly advocating for the type of role like Adrian's to be brought in as a more sort of regular feature, because facilities and teams are starting to work with larger and larger data sets, and with more and more complicated systems that people don't necessarily have the time to be able to maintain or troubleshoot. And bridging that gap is fundamental to being able to move forward in that space in a really decisive manner. So some of the types of projects that we're running through here, I feel like I skipped a slide, but anyway, I'm sure it's going to come up later. So the types of projects that we run through and are facility are quite diverse, and that's been one of the most interesting things about the facility. And it comes down into the way you think about what your business model is going to be. Is one of the things we did when we first pitched our when we're talking to CSIRO and other stakeholders about the value proposition. And you think about this is an automation facility. It means that you'll be able to do things faster. You'll be able to do larger numbers. You'll be able to do this and that. And while that's true in some instances, the reality that we found was that there's an incredible diversity in projects. I mean, it sounds obvious when you say it. But it also means that for each project that you bring in, there's a considerable period of bringing that, onboarding it, and developing the processes around it. And when you're a very new facility, it can take a long time to build those things in place. And you think, okay, well, maybe you just focus on this type of workflow and you focus on this type of project. But the reality is that what comes to you is not necessarily going to be this uniform set of, oh, it's just going to be a build these constructs and then transform into this microorganism and then that's it. It doesn't actually work like that. So you're not going into that sort of high throughput production where you're just like churning things through like perhaps one of those dedicated facilities does. What we get is a more diverse set of projects coming through, and with that we've had to change the narrative to the stakeholders and change how we approach that value proposition. And we have to think about how we approach that more carefully in the future, because I think that in some ways that sort of the narrative of high throughput, we can do everything faster and quicker and more efficiently has been a little bit damaging to the way that we had have been structured and perceived. But that said, we're doing an excellent job at the moment of changing that and working with the AEB FSP and other groups to kind of go, well, it's not necessarily going to be that way, and these are the platforms that we can bring in that are going to show returns. So I'll be interested to hear how other people have approached that and whether they've had similar experiences on this. And there are definitely some foundries around that have some very interesting approaches to, for instance, organism onboarding and very prescribed processes that they've developed over a number of years to bring these things in. And that kind of helps streamline some of these processes to make it a more efficient platform that can drive the numbers through at a higher rate. So as I mentioned, Australia's on a symbio wave at the moment. There are a lot of incentives for startups to come into Australia. There's a lot of money in flowing around at the moment. There's a big drive to increase fermentation capability and capacity. Capacity is the big key. And there are strategies at national and state levels. Each of the states on the eastern coast, so Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria, are all really driving quite hard on this and investing big in their bioeconomies. For the Biofoundry, we have a vision of becoming a sort of a core facility for a bioincubator space. We would like to start on a small scale and just have like a side room where we could bring in a nascent startup so they can have their own space to work in, and when they need access to the automation or the facility staff members, it's just a doorway away from that for them. But that will require space negotiations in the place that we are at the moment. So it will be a little while before we're to get that in place. And we also have an ambition to become a platform where students, postdocs can come and learn how to use the automation, plan their experiments around the larger sorts of numbers that they'll be running through, and using some of the software and other technology that's associated with that. At the moment, we have a student that's from Victoria, has been placed with us for 6 weeks and doing some fantastic work using split GFP system and using our fact sorter to screen her libraries. So that's been fantastic. And we'll be encouraging more of that. So in summary, this is our dedicated team. Colin Scott, as I mentioned, the CSIRO Whisperer, he is now our director. Alison Rice was in the Synthetic Biology Future Science platform as a deputy director and is now a business development manager for CSIRO. And the Biofoundry is one of her projects in her portfolio. And then, yeah, as I mentioned, we've got the dedicated team. I also acknowledge that we've had some fantastic people come through and work with us over the years, and Claudia and Maciek and Hugh have been instrumental in setting up the Biofoundry from the very earliest days, and it was fantastic working with them. Okay, so thank you very much. Please reach out if you've got any questions beyond this. I'm always happy to have a chat with folk. But yeah, I'd like to open up the floor to questions, but also if anyone feels like they would like to talk about how they've approached some of their aspects of building their biofoundries, I'd be really interested to hear, and I think people on the call would also be interested.
Right, thanks so much, Janet.
You're welcome.
So if you have questions, then just you can put them into the chat or raise your hand and we'll ask you to unmute. So I'll just wait a moment to give people a chance. I do have some questions for you, Janet. Maybe I can start off.
Yes.
So in particular, I'm interested in your strategies for recruiting people, and particularly how did you recruit them, where are they coming from, and what sort of background did they have, recognizing that biofoundries are so new, a lot of people don't have the automation experience even if they have the interest. So I'm curious about that.
Yeah, good question. So when we're recruiting for the bioengineers for the facility, what we were looking for was good molecular biology skills, and there was already like a synthetic biology theme running through a lot of the future science platforms drive through the universities and the funding that they put into kind of developing those capabilities. So we've been very fortunate that a lot of the applicants came through with a lot of skill already in that space. But in terms of automation, that was a little bit more of a challenge because a lot of the universities don't really have access to that. They're sort of like still at the pipette-based model of execution, low throughput. But what we were looking for was people that maybe had either sort of programming skills, so Python or R, but also something like if they've got bioinformatics in their background as well as the molecular biology or synthetic biology. Because I mean, if you can program in Python, you can pretty much program any robot in the lab with just a little bit of it's just the way if the way you think about things just changes a little bit, and yeah, so that's been great. And just thinking about people that have skills in managing data sets, that's also been part of it as well. And then with the specialists, so like project officer type roles, having a broad experience, a number of types of organisms, I think has been one of the key things that we were looking for our facility, because we were servicing such a wide range of project types. So we were looking for somebody that had definitely that breadth of experience. And there are a number of candidates that have that out there in the ecosystem. And I think it's again a testament to the way Australian academia has worked. That there are those talented individuals out there. We've been quite fortunate. Was there another part to that question, Ben?
No, I think you got it all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Cool.
So there's a question on the chat from Tim Fallon, and
hi,
just
Tim.
asking, seen other facilities that advertise themselves as high throughput screening and others that call them biofoundries, but I think they're more of high throughput flavor out there. Do you think high throughput type facilities would have business insights into building a biofoundry, or do you see the business model and capabilities of the biofoundry as fundamentally distinct?
I think, Tim, that it depends on who your market is, who you're pitching yourself to, because I think that, well, for us, because we're in a small ecosystem in Australia, but it's a small, diverse ecosystem, the biofoundry, I don't think necessarily that the high throughput screening model necessarily feeds so much into how we would approach things. We thought it would in the beginning. We thought that would we would get a lot of insight from that, but I think that the diversity of project work has negated that. I think that maybe in other communities and in the US, where you have a much bigger pool to choose from, you may be able to take your biofoundry approach and make it more a high throughput screening platform and make it more I won't say niche is not quite the right word, but targeted. And that's where the high throughput screening platform experiences and value proposition would come in. And it's purely just based on the market size, I think, in that instance. Yeah.
Yeah, I can add a couple comments to that, because I think part of it is also, your niche. If you want to really be a niche biofoundry, it works great. But if you don't have the dollars, if you don't have the business, it's hard to get your feet wet. So I think, I guess our biofoundry kind of started out a little bit more in I'm going to say the high throughput biology aspect of it, whether that is in the genomic side of it or the screening side of it. We had those services to offer, and we kind of bootstrapped that a little bit, because it enabled us to get instrumentation. Not necessarily all the things that you want, that's a never-ending dream, but just to be able to get set up and get some people in play, and then branching out as a biofoundry further beyond that. So I guess from our side, and I'm out at UBC in Vancouver, Canada, we basically service all sides because we have to, because without doing that, we would not be able to survive.
I like your setup behind you there, Tom. Yeah, I have automation envy right now. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of our nicest toys. Well,
yeah,
the nicest toy.
Makes a lovely backdrop. Lovely, yeah.
Well, I think it's a real challenge all the time for people to move into full-scale biofoundry unless somebody's backing you. It sounds like Australia is doing it well by backing you, which is great. And I think a lot of other people are finding it's hard to get that backing unless you have those 2 or 3 large projects, and on the university side, those investigators willing to invest the time to get you going. So kudos to you, Janet and Allison, for getting that going there. And it's great to see. Wish we would have similar enthusiasm from our groups here.
I would say that Colin Scott has been instrumental over the past 12 months as well in driving very hard to get some big projects through for us. So we, like you, we now have 3 big projects that are going to be in the new financial year coming up in July. So and that's going to take up the staff time substantially over the next couple of years, which is fantastic. And yeah, all the hard work has paid off from the deep connections that Colin's been building for us. Yeah.
I had a question for Jan.
Go, please.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Since you gave an example of projects at several scales, I'm wondering how are the costs calculated? Are things on a per sample basis, or rather very customized fixed fee from start to finish?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, so at the moment it's sort of roughly on a per plate basis, sort of. But it's also, I think it's largely driven by time as opposed to plate. So because we found that the largest cost is the staff time. The consumables are almost nothing in comparison. I think a number of you have already experienced that. Consumables, and we've been fortunate that we've been able to pay forward a number of service contracts on equipment, so we're covered for a number of years on that kind of thing, and so, but there's still, we have to do cost recovery on the software, the hardware, building a pot so that if we do need to do random maintenance that doesn't fall under contracts, and then the staff time, consumables and staff time. And yeah, so basically I have these spreadsheets where I have all these different protocols sort of mapped out with roughly the types of consumables that might be associated, very roughly, and the types of the amount of time it might take to run a process, and thinking about the bottlenecks and all those types of things. How many can you actually run at a time? How many can you run simultaneously? And you have to split that out over a couple of blocks of time, as opposed to be able to run them all concurrently. So it does get a little bit complicated sometimes, and I'm sure there are better ways of doing it, but at the moment it is still sort of like, okay, to do 2 plates, we go pairing of plates because they go in a centrifuge. How long will it take to run that through? And then then going, okay, how many can I run through simultaneously? Okay, and then that's that chunk of time and money that will cost. And then how much will it cost if we scale that up the next level? How much can be paired and how much needs to be run separately? So yeah, spreadsheets, my friend. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
We have another question from Chris Petzoid. Thanks for the presentation. To answer your question, we've seen the underspend, got to spend situation too. Unfortunately, it's less predictable. It's often feast or famine. Have you found that your case studies encourage new users projects that you utilize the already existing workflows?
Yeah, so when I say case studies, we have one. So it's still a little bit ambitious. We haven't written up any other larger case studies yet. No, I think that most of the stuff that's coming through has been most of the work that's been coming through has been from presentations like this, because we do go out and just talk to people a lot. Each of us, so Alison, Colin, myself, we all just, we're constantly spruiking the Biofoundry, and that's where most of it comes through. And we talk about, in general terms, what types of projects that we can run, but it's also just about the types of equipment that we have, and thinking about how creatively you can use that equipment in projects, when you're sitting down with somebody. Yep. Cool. You're welcome.
I would just like to really emphasise the importance of the communication. We've seen that with the state government engagement, and now where CSIRO is working closely with the ARC Centre of Excellence to get a single joined up voice to government, and because that's really important in sort of furthering the policy agenda of the government that will actually then put, you know, policies and incentives in place that is actually going to help grow this industry for everybody. And so having people well versed in what it can do and being able to showcase stuff like Janet's been doing today, and 10 conferences has been really important to the growth of the Biofoundry, and I guess also taking people on the journey, because a lot of people really don't understand what engineering biology is and why it's actually going to transform their business. So a lot of it, and then that naturally leads into the sort of the conversation of what a Biofoundry can do and how that might change that business's vision and costings and things like that. So a comm strategy is key to underpin Biofoundry's growth.
That's a great lead into a future topic for our webinar. I'm going to put them in the chat. Hopefully this works properly. Because we are looking for future speakers as well. So you can reach out to Alison or I to schedule that if you're interested in speaking. I put them in the chat there. So one of the next topics we're hoping for speakers on is exactly that. So communication strategy, raising awareness, accelerating external outreach, and the branding of your Biofoundry internally. I think Janet kind of spoke to this a little bit about how the CSIRO whisperer has helped you in branding internally, and I've seen that work very well otherwise. So that's great to see. And then there's some other topics there that we're looking for speakers on as well. So please don't hesitate to reach out to Alison or I.
We're thinking that our next webinar will be after the Northern Hemisphere's summer holidays, so probably late August, early September. Gives you plenty of time to think about topics, think about sharing information. It'd be really fabulous to hear from you. And as Ben said, we are always open for a quick conversation if you'd like to reach out to us. Ben.
If I can take the last minute, Janet, I think I saw it very briefly on a slide, but you didn't speak too much about it. But the list of equipment that you have in the Foundry, are you able to put that slide back up again? Because I'm curious about if you can speak to the thought that went into choosing that equipment.
Sure.
That's exactly the stage that I'm in right now.
You'll have to come and visit, Ben.
Oh, sign me up. I'll make that a priority.
Yep. Let me just get back to share screen. There we go. How's that?
Yep. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah. So it was basically thinking about what types of workflows. We also just basically looked at what other Biofoundries had in their kit. And there were, as I said, just some key things that we started with. But then around that, we built in some other things based on conversations with potential customers. We did a lot of work early on talking to potentials customers in Australia and thinking about the types of workflows that they might want to run with us. A flow sorter was something that we always wanted. We weren't able to afford early on, but was something that we brought in the past 18 months or so. So that's been a really fantastic addition to our tools. And I think that early on, we were kind of focused mostly on the sort of DNA and strain screening end of things, and not so much in the protein extraction or screening stage of things, because there are lots of other facilities that can bridge the gap. So that's the other thing with our facility. We weren't trying to do everything. In a CSIRO ecosystem, there are other groups that can do some of the work around. So we don't have any metabolomics, for instance, or proteomics in our lab. We can farm that out to other CSIRO sites. So bringing in a plate imager or an imager for the Lycor Odyssey, that was a recent acquisition, and that was just an indication of us moving into more protein screening work as opposed to just general DNA and organism work. I'd say that colony picking robot, that's an obvious one. I have noted that some people have redundancy and have 2 of them, which I'd really like to have a second one, because if one is out of action for whatever reason, it's one of those kind of bottleneck instruments that if you can't access it, it can make life a little bit challenging. Likewise, having some redundancy in liquid handling is very necessary. So at the moment, one of our robots, the head is off for refurbishment. So we've just got one of the liquid handlers working at the moment, and everyone wants time on it until the head comes back for the other one. That's going to be the way it is. But bringing in a third liquid handler is my next step, so that we just build in just a little bit more redundancy on that one, because it is just such a crucial piece of technology for us. Yeah, and then I guess that there's little things like depending on the direction that your facility is taking. I know the Concordia is more into sort of mammalian space. We've got a lot of people around us who are looking at photosynthetic microorganisms. So having a plant growth cabinet with a shaker inside was a good fit for us. There's people working with cyanobacteria, diatoms. There's work on algae around us. I was very keen to do an algae sorting project, which didn't eventuate, but that would have been really cool. Yeah. So yeah, I think that as I said, mostly based on research on what other people were doing, and then talking to potential customers and working out what types of workflows, what type of equipment, and what technology is out there. What's the next thing that might be useful?
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you.
So.
Yeah, thanks so much, Janet. Always appreciate hearing from you. And we'll get this chat up on our YouTube account relatively soon. There's a bit of a delay last time, but we can make that happen a bit faster. And as Allison mentioned, we'll host our next talk August or September. And please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you're interested in speaking, as we don't currently have a speaker lined up for that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much,
everybody.
Thanks for hosting.
Thanks, Janet. See you later.